Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Yeah? List? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USAPrepares.com. We're delighted you're in class with us today. I'm Vincent Finelli. We broadcast 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. If you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line, we've got one that's working. It's delayed, 701-719-0914, 701-719-0914. Patrick is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. And there's a link to your instructors on the website, USAPREPARES.com. Looks like we're going to be talking about heating with wood today. At our farmhouse in Missouri, when we originally built it, we thought, let's put in a heat pump. A lot of people do that. And we put in actually 2 heat pumps, and we have a zone system, 1 heat pump for the first floor and 1 heat pump for the second floor. And then we thought, well, heat pumps don't work too well when the temperature gets below 25 degrees. So we put in a propane backup system in the heating system. So it looks like it's self-contained. There's a propane fuel supply outside in a propane tank. And there are a couple heat pumps. And the idea is that the system is smart enough to be programmed so that you can say, well, when the temperature gets below 25 degrees, switch from the heat pump in the winter to propane, because the heat pumps are very inefficient below 25 degrees. And how does a heat pump work? Well, it works like an air conditioner. The window units that you used to see and still do? Well, the way they work is they will remove the heat from inside the room in the summer and dump that heat outside. So if you go outside and you feel the air coming out of a window air conditioning unit, you'll find that the air is warmer than the outside air, because the heat is being moved from the inside of the house to the outside. Well, if you were to take that air conditioner and turn it around and put the outside part inside and the inside part outside, you'd find out that you could take the heat, you could move the heat into the house. And that's what a heat pump does. It has a reversible circuit for the flow of the refrigerant to change the direction of the flow, so it can take the heat from one area and move it to another area and also reverse it when the seasons change. Well, it works great usually, but one of the problems with this heat pump system is it uses an enormous amount of electricity. So when you turn your air conditioning on in the summer or your heat pump on in the winter, you find that your electric bill goes way up. And well, that's normal because it's summer and we've got the air conditioning running, or it's winter and we've got the heat running. Well, if you decide that you want to have an alternative energy system, like solar panels, you'll find out that it is really difficult to generate enough electricity to run a heat pump or an air conditioning unit. It can be done. It just takes lots and lots of solar panels if that's the way you choose to generate your electricity. We have a solar array here at the farm. It's about 45 feet long by 13 feet high. That is just one array. That's not enough. There are 28 solar panels on there, and they're 280 watts apiece, and it's nowhere near enough to generate the power that we need to run a heat pump. So we knew that that might be a problem. So we had this propane backup system. Now, the propane backup system is just flick a switch, and we can heat the house with propane. And at first we did. We thought, this can't be too expensive to run. Well, the first year that we heated with the propane backup system and the heat pump. So we'd run the heat pump as long as we could. We'd kind of bank heat. So in those cold winter days, during the warmest part of the day, we would turn the heat pump up and turn the temperature up, so we would bank heat in the house. And then we'd need it less at night when the temperature outside was colder, because it's harder to get heat out of colder air outside than it is to get heat out of warmer air when it's warm outside. It makes sense, right? So we tried to drive our electricity costs down to the minimum by doing that, and we did. However, our electric bill was like $300 a month, and the time that we used the propane backup, we easily used 400 gallons of propane. 400 gallons of propane at roughly $2 a gallon, $800. That's pretty expensive to me. So we thought, what's a better way of doing this? Our heating system is forced hot air, which means we have ductwork. And that ductwork works great for both heating and cooling. It's the same ductwork for the air conditioning system as it is for the heating system. We thought, well, if we could put a heat exchanger, kind of like a car radiator, in our ductwork and use the existing airflow system, meaning the fan and blower system with an electric motor attached, just the kind that you have in your house right now if you have forced hot air. Well, if we could put that heat exchanger in there, we could heat with wood. So we looked around and we found that there are these outdoor wood furnaces. They're about the size of a small shed. Typically, they get set on a concrete pad. So we poured a concrete pad. We got a whole bunch of bags of concrete mix, mixed it in a wheelbarrow, set it in the form, troweled it, leveled it, made sure it was square. And we got that done for the exact wood furnace that we decided to buy. And there are all kinds of outdoor wood furnaces. Sometimes they're called outdoor boilers. There's no boiling going on. It's just heating water. And the way it works is you have a firebox, and the fire is surrounded by a water jacket. So think of it like a firebox inside of a 400-gallon water jacket. Now there's a door in the front, and you can load your wood in the front. And there's a thermostat that determines how hot that water is. And typically that water is heated to between 160 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And there are controls that regulate the temperature of the water. And that's done by allowing more or less air into the firebox. So when the fire approaches 180 degrees, if that is where you want your maximum temperature to be, the air gets shut off. Just enough air is allowed in to let the fire to continue burning, so you don't have to restart it. And then there's a circulator. And the circulator pump will pump water from this water jacket that's heated to between 160 and 180 degrees, and it will pump it into the heat exchanger. And then your normal heating system takes over, where the blower inside your house blows air across the heat exchanger. The air gets heated and it gets distributed through your house through your normal ductwork. And that's what we have. And it works great. Now, there are all kinds of outdoor wood furnaces. You can buy one for a little over $3,000, or you can spend more, maybe up to $10,000, $12,000, maybe even more than that. And they vary in how they burn the wood. So you can get some really, really high efficiency outdoor wood boilers or wood furnaces. But the high efficiency ones require that the wood be really dry, which means that if you're going to cut down trees, which we don't do, we don't cut down trees, we take the wood that's dead and burn that. But if you were to cut down trees, you'd want to cut it and stack it in a dry, warm area where the sun can get to it for over 6 months. You want to drive out that moisture. And the reason for driving out the moisture is if the wood is wet, not from the rain, but from the internal moisture in the tree. If the wood is wet, you have to boil off that moisture, and that takes more energy. And that steam that's created creates creosote. And the creosote clings to the cooler surfaces of the chimney. And creosote is extremely flammable. And if you've ever heard a jet engine roar, that's what it sounds like when you have a creosote fire in your chimney. And that can be a brick and mortar chimney. It can be a terracotta flue-lined chimney. It can be a stainless steel insulated chimney, or it can be just a steel chimney. They all can collect creosote. And the firebox when the flames touch that creosote, if it's hot enough, it can set it on fire, and you will have a chimney fire. And if there's anything that's terrifying in life, a chimney fire is one of those things. It sounds like a jet engine's going off. And if you ever looked at a steel chimney that has a chimney fire in it at night, it is glowing red. That steel chimney, whether it's insulated or not, is glowing red. And then you think about forest fires. Then you think about burning the house down. Then you think about setting the neighborhood on fire. I mean, it's dangerous. So one of the things that you want to do is avoid burning wet wood. Now, you can buy these outdoor wood furnaces that are really high efficiency, and you won't be able to burn wet wood in them. But the problem for us at our farm is we want to be independent. We're not just using this as a way of saving money. We're using this as, well, if the power goes down or the propane guy can't show up with the propane delivery, or if we had an oil burner, maybe the oil burner fuel delivery guy can't get there because, well, maybe they ran out. Maybe their system broke. Maybe there's a shortage. Maybe there's another Arab oil embargo, something like that. Well, we wanted to be independent. So we wanted an outdoor wood boiler that would heat our house with whatever kind of wood we wanted to burn. That could be green wood, Christmas trees, and more. We'll be right back. I'm Vin Finelli. Yeah, we're talking about heating with wood, and Rich Sheben's here with us. Welcome, Rich.
Well, thank you, Mr. Finelli. I just called in to figure out if you need a little company out there.
Well, let me tell the class what happened. So we have an instructor scheduled for today, and I know this instructor, and for some reason, he was unable to make it. When I say for some reason, I don't know why, because I talked to him in the recent couple days ago, and I called this morning a couple times, and he wasn't there. So I decided to. Pat's on the line. Okay. Well, all right. Very good. Let's.
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I'm going to gracefully bow out, and I'll see you on the second hour, or talk to you on the second hour, and I'll let your guest chime in since he was a little late. Okay.
Okay. Very good. Hey, thanks, Rich.
Oh, you bet. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Class, that's what USA Prepares is really like. So Rich Scheben sensed that I was going to ad lib for an hour talking about wood heat. That's something that I know a little bit about because what we do here at the farm. And while we're waiting for Pat Shannan to join us. And so that's who we are. We kind of jump in. And Patrick, our engineer, one day was... Well, he and I were talking before the broadcast, and our instructor wasn't able to make it, and Pat, our engineer, jumped in. No safety net, no plan, no talking points, nothing. And so that's kind of who we are at USA Prepares. And I want to thank all of our instructors for being just as they are. And that's why they're instructors. Pat Shannon's with us. Pat Shannan wrote a book, several books, but the one that I've got in my hand is Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie. And I've got volume 1 in my hands, and Pat Shannan has broadcasted on the radio. He's an investigative journalist. So investigative journalist, author, broadcaster. And he spent the past half century in pursuit of the truth. So the book that he wrote, Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie, is quite fascinating. It talks about many of the things that we've been told that we just believed was absolutely true. And in fact, many of the things that we learned are sleight of hand and lies, obfuscation, and the media is complicit. Welcome, Pat Shannan.
My apologies, my friend. I had a family emergency around here and didn't get back until now.
Wow. I hope everything...
For that, let's get on into the meat of the stuff.
Well, thank you for joining us, and I hope everything works out positively for you. Pat Shannan, yesterday, the day before yesterday, I read a paragraph in your book on page 49. And it's an eyewitness to counterfeiting. had Dr. Norman Shealy on with me, and I asked him if there was a relationship to this eyewitness to counterfeiting. And what you talk about is in late 1959, National Rejectors of St. Louis, Missouri. Now, class, that's not... that is the name of the company, National Rejectors. And if you think about it, this is a company that manufactures coin-operated mechanisms to reject counterfeit coins. Okay, so it's a real company. National Rejectors of St. Louis, Missouri, the manufacturer of 97% of the coin acceptance devices in the United States, received an unannounced visit from several agents of the U.S. Treasury Department and the St. Louis branch of the Federal Reserve Bank, officiously flashing their badges and credentials. The company's top inventor designer was a brilliant New Yorker named Merrill Jenkins. Now, the officers desired an interview with Mr. Jenkins regarding the subject that was normally kept under tight corporate security. What techniques the government agents posing as anti-counterfeiters asked him might a counterfeiter use to deceive state-of-the-art coin acceptance machines? Believing that he was helping protect the interests of the United States Treasury and the American people, Jenkins revealed over the course of the interview that counterfeiters could manufacture copper slug sandwiched between two faces of nickel, and therefore counterfeit. But don't worry, we're talking about a complicated process. Only a very sophisticated syndicate with unlimited resources could turn out these coins in quantity. We'll be right back. Pat Shannon's with us. Pat, your book is available on Amazon.com. Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie. I just read portions of a paragraph about...
Well, hang on there, Vince. Yeah. I'd appreciate it if you'd send them to my website. I don't need Amazon to tell them my...
Okay, well, let's...
INIWorldReport.com.
All right, one more time, please, Pat.
INI, which stands for Independent News International. INIWorldReport.com. All my books, all 9 of my books are there.
Pat, do you ship directly from your site?
Yes.
If someone were to order one, could you autograph it for them if they order directly from you?
Yes. In fact, that's something that we always make a point to do when they order directly.
Okay. There you go, class. So, INIWorldReport.com. INIWorldReport.com. So, Pat, we were talking about the counterfeiting of coins. And it sounds like the Treasury and the Federal Reserve were involved in this massive counterfeiting scheme. Please tell us about that.
Well, Merrill Jenkins was a brilliant man, and in fact, he was a self-made businessman. I imagine a millionaire at that time. But he, as you read in the book, he developed slot machines and pinball machines and these sorts of things. And in addition to that, what you mentioned was the rejectors. He invented the rejector that could discern the difference between a silver coin in 1959 and a counterfeit one. So when those scoundrels came to him, they obviously had more than 5 years ahead of time their plans of what they wanted to do with making the slug coins. And so after 64, starting in 65, the counterfeit coins began to come out. They pulled the silver out, and that's really was the big step towards the massive inflation we've had. $1,000 bag of coins is called pre-65. It's called junk silver for some dumb reason because it's nothing but junk. It is everything but junk.
Right.
What they're making now is nothing but junk. But that bag of silver, and it's way down today, but it has been as high as $38,000. $38,000 of the counterfeit dollars today it would have taken in 2011 to buy one bag of $1,000 face amount. That's the way they have inflated the currency, the paper here. Another point I make: people in the government and the Ministry of Truth always want to talk about taxpayers' money. And as you and I were talking on the phone the other day, if people would stop and think about it, there really is no such thing as taxpayers' money anymore, because they, as mentioned, snatched the silver out of the coins in 65, and then they began to circulate together as they could pull them out. So every time your silver coins would show up in the bank, they would pull them out of circulation, as well as the lawful Federal Reserve note. Don't forget, at one time there was a lawful note that said that it would redeem in lawful money if you presented this note at any Federal Reserve Bank, the United States Treasury. It was right there on the contract. And those also were snatched out of circulation during the next 3 years as they circulated together with the counterfeit notes that had no redeemability clause. And on June the 24th, 1968, is the day that the banking window slammed shut on redeeming the lawful notes. And from that moment on, if you took in a redeemable note, and I carry one in my wallet for coffee shop seminars I have for 20 years, but if you took in one of those redeemable lawful notes, all they would give you is another counterfeit note for it. They would not give you any lawful money as the contract guaranteed. So, from June 24th, 1968, nothing but counterfeit has been manufactured by the Fed and put into circulation. And as we all have realized in the past year, that has jumped to over 20 trillion of circulating counterfeit. Now, every time the government wanted to do something, they just did it. They would just print the money or punch a computer button in modern times and create whatever funds they needed. So what good is taxpayers, so-called taxpayers' money? I wrote a letter to President Regan back in '83, and I said, "What do you need mine for? All you're doing is printing all your own." Of course, I got no answer. But that's something that people need to realize, that it's all government money now. And that's why today the $1 counterfeit bill buys what a penny bought in 1914. We're 99% gone today.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
so Merrill
Jenkins' book of all, his book, and what that anecdote you just spoke about is what inspired him to get educated. And 20 years later, he died. But in the meantime, he wrote Money, the greatest hoax on earth. And it really is the Bible of lawful money. It is a gem. It's a classic work. And I think it's only in Amazon would have that, but it'd probably cost you $100 today. Definitely a collector's item, but it's a classic.
Yeah. I found that was absolutely fascinating. And then I have been presenting seminars from the Mississippi, actually Missouri, all the way to the East Coast about something in Section 3 of your book called The Moon Landing, the biggest media hoax in U.S. history. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that. Why, Pat Shannan, why do you say that the moon landing was a hoax?
Well, 5 years ago, I caught a lot of flack about that. But now with everything that's on the videos and on email that you're getting from other people and of course, YouTube, it's pretty much, there are millions of people who know it today. And of course, you are one of them. You've even given seminars on that. But to answer your question, the pictures were well, let me back up. For 20 years, I bought it. I sat there in my apartment in 1969 in Biloxi, Mississippi, and watched the thing. And I called it Disney's Fantasyland. Wow, this is fantastic. And we're stepping into a whole new modern world now. And for 20 years, I bought it. Of course, I didn't do any investigating on it. Well, who needed to investigate? And everybody in the world knew that Armstrong walked on the moon. Well, 20 years later, a guy by the name of Bill Casing came out with a book that said, "We Never Went to the Moon," was his title. And somebody sent it to me because by this time I was deep into investigative journalism, and they said, "Hey, Pat, have a look at this." And I was fascinated. Here's a NASA engineer saying, "Hey, it was baloney. We never did it." That got my attention. But once again, I was a voice in the wilderness. Bill Casing actually sued, I think it was Jim Lovell, one of the astronauts, I believe it was Lovell, that called him a kook or something derogatory, and Casing sued him, and not because he wanted any money, but because he wanted to get him on the witness stand under oath. And Lovell figured that out, and somehow they engineered a judge to throw it out of court. But with the kind of deep state stuff that's going on behind the scenes, I'm sure that was not hard for them to do, to get that case thrown out. Then the more we read, and then as YouTube came along and all the evidence that's available now, and one more, Jack White. Jack White I became familiar with way back in the 70s. He was a photographer expert and did some of the very early work on the Kennedy assassination, as you probably know. And he was a photographic expert, and he's the one that spotted Badge Man on the grassy knoll there, and worked very closely with other serious investigators like Jim Mars and others. In fact, Jim and Jack actually worked for the same newspaper, Fort Worth Telegraph. Well, Jack White discovered on the moonwalking thing. I've got the exact figures in the book, and I'm not going to try to take your time and go find the page, but it's in there on how he discovered that some 48 or 4,900 total minutes were spent on the moon, and I think it's 5,800 and 4,900 pictures came back showing that they were taking pictures on all those so-called moonwalks every 45 seconds. And Jack White says, okay, they shot themselves in the foot here. If they were taking pictures every 45 seconds, how could they have had time to do anything else? And NASA's always shooting itself in the foot. Now they got this moron who, I don't know, he must have been born yesterday, but he comes on under the NASA label, and he's saying, yes, it's true. We once had the technology to get to the moon, but we lost it. What? They don't have it anymore.
That's hysterical.
Yeah. How come they haven't been back in 50 years? Well, we don't know how anymore.
I often talk about this subject, and I say, people go on vacations. And what do they do after they go on vacation? They find a nice place. They go back there. Well, if we made it to the moon, why wouldn't we go back? It's as simple as the vacation analogy. Yeah.
Well, another thing, as I pointed out in your book you got there, that there was something like 700 boxes and cases of their literature and photographs and all kinds of data from the alleged moonwalks, and they have disappeared from the shelves of NASA. Now, give me a break. I mean, it was the most important thing that ever happened in the history of the world since Jesus Christ walked on the water. I mean, nothing else has been this significant. This dwarfs Lindbergh's trip across the ocean. And here they throw all the data away, and then now we've recently learned that they even copied over some videotapes because they were videotaping something one day and they didn't have enough blanks, so they used...
that stuff would be, if it were true, it would be under a very secure guard. It would be in a vault, within a vault, within a vault.
Like the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
And something else on that subject, I'll point out, Armstrong became a recluse. Now, here's a guy that's as big as Thomas Jefferson in our modern 20th century. And he almost never made a public speech anywhere. He lived till 2012, and he was a recluse. I know why, and you do too, because he was ashamed of himself. And all of them were forced to lie. And we're seeing now, during the Trump administration, and some of these things being exposed with Pizzagate and all, now we're learning how they control them. And I remember when... we got a break coming on, I guess, huh?
Well, Pat, we're going into a break. I'd like to share something very quickly when we come back, my firsthand experience. Pat Shannan. Class Pat Shannan's with us, and he's going to be with us for the next half hour as well, after top of the hour news and commercial announcements. INIWorldReport.com. INIWorldReport.com. So Pat Shannan, I was scheduled to speak in Huntsville, Alabama, at a convention. And I got a call a few days before the convention from the promoter of the convention. And I said, hey, Randy, what can I do for you? He said, well, it's more like what I can do for you. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know where you're going, right? And I said, yeah, I'm going to Huntsville, Alabama. And he said, you know what's there, right? Yeah. He said, well, that's a NASA Visitors Center. And you're going to be speaking about the moon landing hoax. Probably not a good idea. So I changed the topic to talk about extreme tax deductions. But so he was concerned about me speaking about the moon landing hoax, where there was a major NASA installation, if you will. Well, let's go back to 1993. In 1993, I had given our computer manufacturing company in Virginia, to the county public training camp, the school system. And I was teaching a very large class on computer technology, advanced computer technology, and manufacturing, entrepreneurship. And so this large class seemed to become a center of interest for the educational system in the Commonwealth of Virginia. A U.S. congressman came to my class. We didn't invite him. He just showed up. The Department of Education would come down and they go, wow, it's unbelievable what you're doing. We sold $1,200,000 worth of computers out of my classroom the first year. We were networking schools. I mean, we were doing some really interesting things. Well, as a result of that, the Department of Education said, well, tell you what, why don't you take our place at the state fair for 11 days and have your class use our exhibit space and do whatever you want with it. So I brought my class to the state fair. My class was one where all the students wore uniforms in a public school. Only in my class were there uniforms. And there was a code of conduct and so forth. So one of the things that I used to teach, one of the strategies that I used to teach was I would leave my students alone and let them figure out what to do on their own. So I'd say, I'll be back in a minute, and I'd be back in a half an hour. Or I'd say I'd be back in half an hour, and I'd be back in a minute. I always kept them off guard. And it was just a strategy that I used. So I said many times, I'm just going to go walk around the state fair. I'll be back. And there was a NASA exhibit right down the hall from us, and I found it fascinating. And they had these photographs, large poster-sized photographs. And I would go over there, and I'd stand, and I'd look at them and look at them and look at them and look at them. And at one point, a uniformed NASA employee came over to me, and she said, "That's really something." I was the only one looking at this photograph at the time. And she said, "That's really something." And I said, "It is, but it's a fake." And she looked at me. She kind of turned a different color and, kind of surprised at what I said. And she said, "Why do you say that?" And I pointed to the alleged astronaut's helmet, and I said, on the moon. And I said, if you look right here, right here, in the reflective foil of the helmet that this alleged astronaut was wearing, you can see the photographer, and he's not wearing a spacesuit. And I said, if you go over here, you can look at the lunar lander, and you can see the pad, these disc-shaped pads that supported the lunar lander on the surface of the moon. There's no dust on it. How's that possible? How is that possible? And then I said, over here, if you look at this one, here's an astronaut, alleged astronaut, tethered to the space capsule, orbiting the moon, and he's in the foreground, the capsule's in the background, he's on this long tether, floating in space. Who took the picture? Who took the picture? She said, "You're right. You're right. Those were taken at a stage in Houston." She admitted that they were staged photographs. She admitted it, a NASA employee. If they could figure out who she was, she'd probably be fired right this minute. When we come back, I'll tell you the rest of that story. First-hand experience that I had about the moon landing hoax. First-hand experience. Pat Shannon's with us. INI WorldNet, INIWorldReport.com. We'll be back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Hour number 2 of USAPrepares.com. And Pat Shannon's with us. Pat Shannan wrote the book. One book is, he actually wrote many books. The one I have in my hand is Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie. And if you go to page 1 of USA Prepares, the first post is a link to Pat Shannon's website. The website is INIWorldReport.com. INIWorldReport.com. We're talking about the moon landing, and I believe, as well as Pat Shannon does, that it was a hoax. And to continue the story, after the 11 days at the state fair in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where my classroom and I represented the Department of Education, years later, I was in Missouri, the state of Missouri, and I was buying some seeds for growing vegetables in our garden. And there's a company down the road from us, about 11 miles or so, well, actually maybe a little more than that, down the road from us. And this company has this old, like, general store type building. And it was near closing time, and Mrs. Finelli was there, I was there, and there was another couple, a little younger than, they appeared to be a little younger than we. Well, anyway, we were talking, and we were talking about some of the photographs of the moon landing. And this man asked me if I really believed it was a hoax, and I said, yeah, it was. It was. I believed it was. And he told me that that he was a photographer in shooting some of these moon landing hoax photographs. How's that possible? And actually, I think I misspoke. He's not younger than we, older than we. So he said that he was a photographer, and he shot some of these photos, and yes, they were shot in Houston. So that's the explanation point that I have for the story. Pat Shannan, your thoughts?
Well, you reminded me of something long forgotten by history, but in 1953, and I think he repeated it in 58 when Van Allen came up with his radiation belts theory. But anyway, and we're talking about Werner von Braun, and there cannot be a better authority on the moon subject than he. And he said back in the 50s that it would be impossible to take a rocket ship to the moon because, first of all, to have one large enough to house the fuel that it would take for a 500,000-mile round trip would have to be as big as the Empire State Building. And then in 58, when Van Allen came along, he repeated it and said that in addition to that, in order to get through the Van Allen belts, this rocket ship would have to have at least a 1-foot thick lead wall around the whole thing to protect the astronauts, and which would render it far too heavy to even get off the ground. So he thought the whole thing in the 50s was ludicrous. Of course, they had to reprogram him in the 60s after Kennedy came along and said, hey, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. But that's a suppressed piece of history. And by the way, that's what we do at INI. It's not just there to sell books, but we update it with 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of suppressed history almost every day. So people can use the INI World Report website just to see what mass media is denying us this day.
And the question is that I've been asked, why would I talk about the moon landing hoax in conventions that are centered on the preparedness theme? And the reason is, if we have been told lies this fantastic for this long, how do we learn how to discern the truth so we can decide how to prepare and what for? Well, the lies are huge. And Pat Shannan, let me ask you. Here's the question that I'm asked all the time. How is it possible that a lie this big could be kept secret for so long? How is it possible that, the truth could be kept from us for so long?
Power of the media, power of the press. Once again, almost everything goes back, if not everything, goes back to the counterfeit money. Once the Fed got control of the printing press in 1914, and gradually, they printed far too many lawful notes, the redeemable notes, and that's why they had to renege on the contract, because it was by 1964, or even before, it was far too many for them to ever hope to redeem. But with that power, and once again, we're seeing it now in the last year so much with the deep state stuff that Trump administration has exposed. But with that power, they can buy anything, and including the press. Now, they also suppress those people with phony accusations, as they're trying to do with Trump right now, but also real evidence that is phony. And by that I mean, they'll have some party going on at the hotel down in D.C., and one guy has a little bit too much to drink, and then they slip a Mickey in his drink as well, and so they call his wife and say he's had too much to drink. He's going to sleep here tonight, and they put him up in the room upstairs. And when he wakes up the next morning, there's a 12-year-old boy in bed with him, and the cameras are rolling. That's how they control these people. And, of course, they only need to do that with the uncontrollable ones, like George Hansen and Larry McDonald. We all know what happened to them. So this is the power. I asked Hoppy Heidelberg, who was the grand juror who tried to get to the truth back in Oklahoma City in 95, and he and I became close friends over those years. He just passed away in 12. But I even stayed at Hoppy's house a few times, and we had a lot of in-depth conversations. And I called him in 2003, after 9/11, so it would have been in 02, about January or so. The Ben Parton, of all people, General Parton, who we also both became very close with during the Oklahoma City investigation, who showed the bombs were inside the building, and ANFO could not do this. And here, about 3 or 4 or 5 months after 9/11, New York Times quotes General Parton as saying he saw no reason why the airplane fuel and the planes crashing into the trade towers would not have brought down the buildings. I called Hoppy. I said, Hoppy, what's wrong with Ben? He's almost 80 years old now. How do they frighten him? He said, he's got grandkids, Pat. And that's right. And that's how they do it. And they don't, people value their children's and grandchildren's lives far more than they value their own, especially when they get to be my age. So that's the power of legal tender. They can control anything. So that includes the news, and it includes history. And if you read my musings, I do a musings column every month at INI. If you read my December musings, you'll see one even bigger than that just coming down the pike now and being exposed.
Pat Shannan, you mentioned the Oklahoma City bombing. Of course, the name Timothy McVeigh comes up. And,
Patsy.
I thought about this, and in my mind, well, tell me what you think happened to Timothy McVeigh, and I'll tell you what my thoughts are.
Oh, well, I wrote about that in the book that you have, and I believe that since the woman saw him when they allegedly executed him, and the woman saw him breathing, and the Chicago newswoman, Craig Roberts, my friend in Oklahoma, that we go back to the Oklahoma City bombing together too. He was a cop and detective and investigator that the FBI made the mistake of offering to work with. But anyway, and by the way, Craig has the best book of all ever written, including mine. And he has the best of all on the Oklahoma City bombing, and it's just come out in the last couple of months. And he, you can find it on the internet, but Craig Roberts had more inside information on that than anyone else. And of course, once again, back to the videos and the communication, mass communication we have now with email. So many of these things are being exposed. But no, I do not believe that McVeigh was executed. I first did because I needed to get rid of him, and many people still believe that. But now I'm not so sure after talking with Craig, and he explained to me how the Black Ops guys protect their own. And for McVeigh not to have been allowed to live, they would have lost the cooperation of so many of their others around the world. They got to know they'll be protected.
Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, and that's what I had thought, that they said we need to find whoever we can pin this on, some kind of a patsy. So they got Timothy McVeigh, and they arrested him. And they said, well, and this is my conjecture. Tim, look, we're going to get you out of this. Don't worry. And then they said, well, shoot, it looks like we're going to have a trial, but it'll be okay. You'll be found not guilty. And then they said, well, okay, it looks like that's not going to work. So you're going to have to be found guilty. Well, but it's okay, because what we'll do is we'll let you out of, you'll escape. And that didn't work. And so they said, well, we'll get you out of prison. And that didn't work. So they said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. It looks like you're going to have to be executed, but it'll be okay, because here's what you do. You fake your death, and then we'll take you out in the hearse, and you'll be have a new identity, and everything will be good. And then my thought was that they actually killed him. That was my thought. That's my thought, which is probably what you were saying before you had second thoughts, right?
Yes, and of course it still could have happened, But they didn't let the other guys know about it. They just kept they assured them that Tim was down in Brazil drinking Cuba Libras.
Yeah. When we come back, let's talk a little bit more about Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bombing. And I'll tell you what I saw on the news live. Only one time, never to be repeated. Pat Shannon's with us. Pat Shannon's with us. And we've been talking about his book, Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie. If you'd like to go to his website, worldreport.com. Link on the website, usaprepares.com, page number 1. Pat Shannon, I was watching the live television news about the Oklahoma City bombing. And there was a news reporter talking to another person on camera live. And the news reporter said, kind of touched the headphone. They're stopping the rescue to remove the unexploded ordnance from the basement of the building. That's what was said. Did you hear that? Is that something that you knew about?
Yes, in fact, I have a bit. Somebody, and I think in Dallas, put together a video on that of the early news reports, and that, of course, was included. And, of course, them hauling out the unexploded bombs was actually recorded.
And that was something that was only on the air one time that I know of, just one time, never to be seen again. It was like you weren't supposed to say that.
Yeah. I've said ever since then, if not before, that if you want to know what's really going on in these high publicity travesties, just catch the early news, the first 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And Oklahoma City was the classic example of that, because those guys were telling the truth until somebody from up above shut them down.
Yeah, and also it's true of the weekend news. It seems like the upper level management that sanitizes the news is off for the weekend, and the lower level people at the news sites don't know better, and they just report what they learn. So the weekend
news is right. You remember in North Carolina, the Eric Rudolph chase with the FBI back in, what was that, 98?
Yeah.
And I was the first story I ever covered for Media Bypass magazine, and I ended up doing a cover story on it. But I was talking to some newsmen. I remember one was from Charlotte, another from Raleigh. We were chatting outside one of the buildings there one day, and I told them what you and I have been discussing about actually General Partners, first one to discover the bombs in the building, and he could discern that by looking at no more than the magazine covers of Time and Newsweek. And that's why he, on his own, came to Oklahoma City and met us and others. But I was telling these newsmen about the bombs inside the building, and Tim McVeigh was a cover story, and everything you and I just been discussing. And then I told him a situation that happened with the Associated Press. And there was a reporter, J.D. Cash, and I went down to the AP office, and he wrote for a little paper in southeast Oklahoma, and they'd been carrying his stuff on the wire, and then suddenly they stopped a month or two into the game, and so he wanted to know why, and so he asked them, how come you guys aren't carrying my stories anymore about, well, the Mideast connection and other stuff that the government didn't want reported, and how come you're not putting my stuff on the wire? It's only being published in my little county paper. Mm-hmm. His answer was, the FBI was by here a few weeks ago, and they told us not to run any more of your stuff. Now, that's police state, man. And I told these local newsmen about that story, and one of them, I'll never forget, he remarked, he said, wow, that scares me more than the bombs in the building.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been talking about the sanitized news for years, and it's absolutely positively true. As a matter of fact, it used to be that we used to have over-the-air television, and if you'd watch ABC, CBS, and NBC, I'm talking about years ago, it'd be the same stories, possibly a different order, possibly one or two stories might change, but the main stories, the top stories, were the same on all the networks.
That's right. So, I remember it well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So investigative journalists, where'd they go?
got programmed out. Tucker Carlson seems to be getting away with quite a bit, but I can't think of anybody else on mainstream that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, mainstream. And so where does one get the news? In addition to your website, iniworldreport.com, are there other outlets that you think are accurate?
I get most of mine from people sending me emails. I get a few hundred a day on 3 different emails. So that takes my time. People want to know how come I don't mess with Facebook and the others. I don't have time.
Yeah. Pat, can you come back next week? Can you come back next Friday and talk about cryptocurrency?
Yeah. I've been involved with that for a couple of years. I'm no expert on it, but I can pass on my experiences.
Sounds great. Rich Sheben's with us. Offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. And I was mentioning the name Marjorie Wildcraft. She's got a commercial running on this broadcast. And I mentioned that to our engineer Patrick that she was at the Get Prepared Expo. And I saw the smoke and I smelled something kind of cooking in the Expo Convention Hall. And there was Marjorie Wildcraft, and she came over to me. She said, "Vinny, come on over." So I went over there, and she said, "Try one of these." And they were frying up some bugs in a frying pan. And these were these real thick, worm-like creatures. And I guess they were fresh until they hit the pan. And I said, thanks anyway. And I did not try one. But others did. Others had some fried bugs, pan-fried bugs, at the Get Prepared Expo. I just thought I'd mention that because I heard her commercial right here on USA Prepares. And I tried to give her a call. And her phone went to voicemail, so obviously she's tied up. Rich Sheben, welcome. Have you? I know you hunt for food, but you don't go digging up grubs, do you?
No, I haven't been that desperate yet. There's a shirt out there that's going to have the same context of the message, but it says something like, and I'm going to paraphrase it: vegetarian. It's hyphenated, and the definition is word for bad hunter. And I think that would be appropriate for someone who eats grubs. Now, I'm not saying that we might not go there someday, because we're losing so many skill sets, and so many people being herded into urban, suburban America. But I sure hope we don't, and that's one of my many reasons for being on shows like this.
Yeah. One of our instructors, Franco Malaya, was on Doomsday Preppers. And he and Ellen Busick, another instructor, were raising fish in tanks, aquaponics, fish and plants surviving together, thriving together. And Doomsday Preppers did what would you call it, a episode where these two gentlemen, these two instructors, were in a friendly competition, if you will. That's how they portrayed the growing of aquaponics. And I believe it was the producer who was filming and looked at this container of bugs growing in rotten apples. So rotten apples were put into this box, and it had a little bit of ventilation, and these bugs were thriving. And the producer said to Franco, "Tell you what, let's get a video of you eating one of these bugs." And that was not the point. The point was they were feeding these bugs to the fish. So it was not something that anybody would do that I know, eat bugs, that have been grown for fish food. Marjorie Wildcraft might, but Franco Malaya is certainly not interested in doing that. And he said, no way. And the producer said, "I'll tell you what, you eat one, and I'll eat one." So Franco kind of grinned and gritted his teeth and looked for the smallest of the bugs in this crate, ate it, and he told me it was disgusting. It's horrible. And so he turned to the producer and said, "Okay, your turn." And I'm paraphrasing. And the producer said, "No way." and Franco told me he was sick for 3 days. I mean, he was violently sick for 3 days after eating that bug. So here's the point, class. Just because you see it on TV, it may have been cut and edited and made it look into like something that it's not. As a matter of fact, I was reading an article, Rich Scheben, a little off topic today, but I think it's important. There is a technology that video circuit board manufacturers have unveiled that will let them change a scene. They can literally take a summer scene, like of cars going down the road, and they can turn that scene into something that it's not true. So they can make it winter, and they can put snow on the trees. They can put snow on the roads. They can put people in places where they never were. So now what we're looking at is the possibility of fabricated evidence. Your Honor, here's a photograph of Mr. Smith, and you can see that by the position of the sun that it was specific time, and that's when this crime was committed. And in this next photograph, you can see Mr. Smith reading a newspaper, and there's the date, and that was the day that the crime was committed. And you can see that with facial recognition software, which says 100% certainty that it was Mr. Smith himself, that he was there at that time, at that place, and obviously he did it. And Mr. Smith may never have been there, but the fabrication now is so good with digital manipulation that they can literally put us in a place where we've never been, date and time stamp it, and put a GPS marker on it, so they can say we were there. I mean, they can fabricate alleged evidence and use it against us. And the next thing is, I'm pretty darn sure they can convict us with this, because the jury would say, well, obviously I saw it. I saw the picture. I saw the date. I saw the time. It sure looks like him. He was there. He did it. I can see that happening. I just wanted to share that's how frightening technology has become in the hands of bad people.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're basically talking about subsets under artificial intelligence. They could take your DNA. You go to the hospital for whatever procedure, and they've got your DNA. Mm-hmm. And they can stick your DNA at a crime scene saying, yep, this guy did it. And that's one of the reasons why I stopped, in March of this year, stopped taking my radio and TV shows that I do off the air or off my website. And because the powers that be were going in and changing the words, my audio words, and making me say things. And they were taking it out of context, deleting some words, adding words, using my voice. And they can even do this with video right now. And you were talking about, the doomsday preppers. I've gotten some pretty, I don't want to say big offers because we never talked money, but I had quite a few production companies offer me stints on reality television and filming me for a documentary. And basically, I turned them all down because they wanted it to be scripted. And I knew that they had but they could always re-edit things, use my voice, and make me say things that I didn't say. And I said, only if I have final editing rights, and none of them would do that. So they don't care about the benefits to the people, especially the bottom 93%. They only care about, A, feathering their own nest, and basically manufacturing perception, pity, guilt, ideology, just like what the mainstream media does. The mainstream media, folks, is not just newspapers, magazines, television, and radio. It's also publishing companies and production companies. Their job is to sway public opinion. Their job is to control the narrative, the meme, the theme, the talking points, and the microphone. And this is how the divide and conquer strategy works, which, as you know, if you've heard me long enough, and my rant yesterday, divide and conquer really means lowering the bars of standards and expectations to disallow synergy and manufacture division, because the MO of the elite is to distract, dumb down, and divide us by groups. And that's why there's so much race baiting and gender baiting. Their job is to make us submissive and break our will. Their job is to use these politically correct, hijacked buzzwords like racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, conspiracy theorist, all this stuff, and literally demonize and discredit and delegitimize the individual through all mediums. And this is why I don't even accept the term fake news. It's way, way worse than fake news. Individuals who work for the mainstream media are bought and paid for, and that's one of the reasons why they use teleprompters so much. So when you basically use this divide and conquer strategy, you lower the bars of standards and expectations, and that destroys the country, Vince.
Yeah. I was at a convention with Mrs. Finelli, and it was one of those preparedness conventions in the 1990s. And we drove 1,100 miles from Virginia to go to this convention. And there were some really, really interesting, bright people there. John Truckman was there, Bo Greitz, Jack McLam, and others. And I was interested, Joel Wallach was supposed to be there, Len Horowitz. And I was really interested in meeting some of these people. And so we went there, and looked like everybody was kind of like us. Bottom 93%, today's term, middle class, nicely dressed. I'm not talking about wearing, wedding attire. I'm just saying, nice, neat, clean, casual, except for one guy. One guy looked like he rode in on his motorcycle. He had, fringe. He looked like he was a member of Hell's Angels. And there was a photographer there and a producer type person. And this guy was interviewing and taking video of the attendees and the exhibits and the speakers and so forth. But as soon as this guy walked in, the guy that looked like he was from Hell's Angels, a member of the Hell's Angels motorcycle club, the cameraman and talent, if you will, or producer, went over to him and started interviewing him. And Mrs. Finelli turned to me and said, "Look at that. Here we have someone who really doesn't look like everybody else. The odd person. The fringe." And so I went up to after the interview with that man, I went up and said, "Why are you interviewing that person, not others?" And he said, "You want to be interviewed?" And I said, "Sure. I've just got a couple of requirements. One, I'd like to have a copy of all the video, the final copy, and your business card." And he said, "No." And I said, "No." Rich Scheben, I've been thinking about the term fake news, and I don't think it's the best term. I believe you agree with that. So I looked up the word fake news and definitions. And the word fake as a verb means, according to the internet, affect, assume, copy, counterfeit, fabricate, feign, forge, pretend, put on, sham, and simulate. As a noun, charlatan, copy, forgery, fraud, hoax, imitation, imposter, mountebank, phony or phony reproduction, sham. As an adjective, affected, artificial, assumed, counterfeit, false, forged, intimidation, mock, phony, pseudo. And I think the term ought to be, instead of fake news, ought to be manufactured news. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's why I always say manufactured perception by the MSA. And it is fake and phony. All those words were accurate, whether it be a noun or adjective or whatever, but it's to sway public opinion and manufactured perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. When you were using that example of that one person that was getting interviewed, I think everybody in your audience knew that was manufactured to sway public opinion. I think everybody in America knows now that it's narrative carryover, whether it be CNN, NBC, ABC, doesn't matter. Country to country, the mainstream media is owned by just 5 companies. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Nazi groups, they're all funded from the top down. And this is why, globalists, really, including NGOs, should be arrested because they're manufacturing also and buying sedition, treason, espionage, and that needs to be punished. Until we replace our government's cabinet with average Joes and implement what I always talk about on the air all the time, practice what you preach laws, things are going to be very, hard times for the average Joe, and basically what I call the poor/middle class, because they're melded together, in other words, AKA bottom 93%. So we have to have public forums where average Joes can speak, like what you have here on usaprepares.com, and give ideas and solutions. And then we need to read research and ask questions. We need to listen. And then we need to speak up using objective facts in lieu of subjective emotional opinions, and not act like fifth graders and scream and yell and do violence and things of that nature. We need to have adult communication and have intellectual conversations instead of letting AI and all these electronics take over us. I think even, and I've mentioned this on the air many times, I'm going to paraphrase it, but Einstein says when technology gets so embedded in our system, and we lose communication skills, we're going to have generations of idiots. And I think we're knocking on that door, Vince.
Yeah, I agree. And, just getting back to fake or manufactured news, every instructor whom I've talked with personally that has been on Doomsday Preppers has told me that Doomsday Preppers, and these are my words, not their words, has manufactured unrealistic scenes and situations that were on Doomsday Preppers. So Doomsday Preppers said, why don't we, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll have you run through the woods, and you'll have these boxes that we pick up at Walmart, these little plastic boxes with lids, and we'll put some supplies in them, and we'll have you run through the woods and find them. And because you've already prepared your escape route, and this is where your supplies are. So let's just cover these up with leaves, and we'll get a video of you doing that. I mean, that's just one example. The other example is eating the bugs. So what I'm saying is, people watching this on TV think that this is real. This is cut, pasted, edited, engineered, manufactured, and it's not real. And this is Doomsday Preppers. And that's why I had them on the air with me, because I wanted them to know that there's nobody I know that behaves the way they have depicted these preppers, if you will, on their shows. I didn't know anybody who behaved like that. So I challenged them, and they said, you know what? We've upped the content of education to 50% as a result of us complaining, if you will.